In the cold emptiness of space, the wreckage of an escape pod drifted aimlessly. Inside it, a young alien girl named Silara fought for her life. Her body was bruised and battered, and her energy was quickly fading. She was from the Tuvarian species, a race of people known for their strength and wisdom, but even they had their limits. The Zelthar Dominion, a ruthless empire bent on conquering the galaxy, had wiped out her entire colony. Now, Silara was alone, the last of her kind. Her escape pod had been damaged during the attack, and she had been floating in space for hours, her oxygen running low. The cold of space seeped into her bones, and she knew her time was running out. She tried to focus on her breathing, but the pain in her side was too much. There was nothing she could do. For a brief moment, Silara allowed herself to think of her people, their laughter, their songs, the warmth of their homes. Now, all of it was gone. The Zelthar had destroyed everything. Her heart ached with the weight of her loss, and tears filled her eyes, though they froze instantly in the freezing air of her pod. The silence of space was all she had left. But then, just as her eyes began to close in surrender, a distant signal reached her ears. It was faint, a mere whisper against the vast emptiness, but it was enough. Her heart skipped a beat as she forced herself to look toward the blinking red light on her console. Life signs detected. She gasped, unsure if she was imagining it. She had been alone for so long that even the smallest flicker of hope seemed too good to be true. She couldn't waste time thinking about it. She pressed a button on the control panel, sending a distress signal into the void, and then collapsed back into her seat. Minutes passed, maybe hours, and just as her strength began to give out, she saw a flash of light in the distance. It was too bright, too fast to be anything natural. Her heart raced as the shape of a ship grew larger and larger in her view. It was human. There was no mistaking it. The ship was sleek and strong, a symbol of human defiance in the face of the universe's cruelty. This was no ordinary ship. It was a warship, an explorer's vessel, the Iron Will. Silara's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. The humans were supposed to be a young, inexperienced species, barely able to protect their own world. But here, they were, showing up at just the right moment, like a beacon of light in the darkness of her final hours. The ship came closer, its engines glowing as it moved through the vastness of space. She could barely hold her eyes open now, her body so weak. But before she could lose consciousness, the ship's docking bay opened, and a small shuttle launched toward her pod. The shuttle connected to her pod with a soft clunk. A few moments later, the door to her escape pod opened, and a human stepped inside. Silara had seen humans in passing before, but this one was different. He was tall and strong, with sharp eyes that radiated determination. His uniform bore the insignia of a human military commander. His name was Elias Carter, and he had seen more battles than most people ever would. He had fought in wars, led troops, and lost comrades, but nothing had prepared him for what he was about to face. He knelt beside Silara, quickly assessing her condition. The sight of the alien girl, so frail and broken, stirred something deep inside him. He had always been taught to help others, no matter who they were. This was no different. He activated the emergency medical equipment on his suit and gently placed a mask over Silara's face to provide oxygen. "You're going to be all right," Elias muttered under his breath, though he wasn't sure if he believed it himself. The girl was barely alive, but he couldn't let her die. Not like this. Not in the cold emptiness of space. Silara's eyes flickered open as she felt the mask against her face, her chest rising and falling with each breath. Her vision was blurry, but she could see the human now, his face hard and determined. There was no fear in his eyes, only focus. "Why are you helping me?" she whispered, her voice weak. "I'm no one. My people are gone." Elias didn't hesitate. He had seen too much death in his life to leave someone behind, especially not someone like this girl, whose fate was still uncertain. "Because everyone deserves a chance," Elias replied softly, "even you." As Silara's eyes closed again, she felt a flicker of something. Hope. Something she thought she had lost forever. And for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was a future for her after all. Tilara slowly regained consciousness, her vision blurry at first. She felt warmth, something she hadn't felt in what seemed like forever. The coldness of space had almost consumed her, and now, as the warmth of the human ship wrapped around her, she realized she was safe for the moment. Her body ached, but the pain was bearable compared to the deep emptiness she had felt moments before. She was alive, and that was something she had not expected to be. But as she opened her eyes fully, she saw Commander Elias Carter standing beside her bed in the small medbay. He was checking his equipment, making sure everything was in order. His face was serious, but there was kindness in his eyes, something Tilara hadn't seen in a long time. She had heard stories of humans, brave, strong, and sometimes reckless, but she never imagined meeting one like him. As she tried to sit up, a wave of dizziness hit her, and she collapsed back onto the soft bed. Elias moved quickly, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Take it easy," he said softly. "You've been through a lot. Your body needs time to heal." Tilara frowned, still confused by her situation. She wasn't sure whether to trust the human who had saved her or to keep her guard up. The Tavarians had never trusted outsiders, especially humans. Her people had always believed in standing alone, in fighting for themselves, without relying on others. But here she was, in a human ship with a human helping her. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, her voice weak but sharp. "I'm nothing but a survivor. My people are gone. The Zelfar will kill you too if you keep me around. You should leave me here. Let me die." Elias didn't respond immediately. Instead, he pulled up a chair and sat beside her, his expression thoughtful. He didn't seem afraid or troubled by her words. "You're wrong," he said quietly. "You're not just a survivor. You're a symbol. You're the last of your kind. The universe is a much darker place when we give up." He leaned forward slightly. "Humans don't believe in leaving anyone behind, not even someone we've just met. I'm not going to leave you to die." Tilara's heart tightened in her chest. The words felt strange to her. She had never known humans to act this way. Most species in the galaxy were selfish, driven by their own needs and desires. Yet here was this human, this Commander Elias Carter, who spoke as though it was natural to help someone in need, no matter who they were. "But you don't understand," Tilara whispered, her eyes looking away. "I'm nothing. I'm the last of my people. The Zelfar will hunt me down. They will destroy anyone who helps me." Elias placed a hand on her arm, his grip firm yet reassuring. "I've seen what the Zelfar can do." His voice dropped low, as if remembering the battles he had fought in. "But I've also seen what they can't do. They can't stop a person who refuses to give up. And that's exactly what you are. Tilara, you're not just the last of your species. You're a living reminder of everything they failed to destroy." Tilara turned her head back to him, her eyes filled with confusion and uncertainty. She had never been told such things. She had been raised to believe in the strength of her people, in their ability to protect themselves, to keep their traditions alive. Now that they were gone, she felt as though she had lost her purpose. Elias continued, his voice steady. "You don't have to carry the weight of your people alone. I won't let you." He paused and added, "Together, we'll find a way to fight back." Tilara felt a strange stir in her chest. A small spark of hope flickered. Could it really be possible? Could there be something left to fight for? She closed her eyes, taking in a deep breath. The pain in her side was still there, but it was fading. The feeling of hopelessness that had once consumed her began to ease, replaced by something unfamiliar. Hope. "But the Zelfar will never stop coming. They'll hunt you down. They'll hunt everyone down who tries to protect me," Tilara said, her voice quieter now, filled with doubt. "They've destroyed everything, Elias. What can we possibly do against them?" Elias smiled, a glint of determination in his eyes. "You'd be surprised what humans can do when they have something to fight for." Silara was quiet for a long moment, thinking. She had heard stories about humanity, how they had once been weak, scattered across their homeworld, barely able to protect themselves. But now, they were everywhere. They had fought and won wars that many had thought impossible. Perhaps Elias was right. "What do you want me to do?" she asked, her voice steady for the first time in what felt like ages. Elias stood up and looked out the small window of the medbay, his face hardening. "First, we need to get you stronger. After that, we find a way to take the fight to the Zelfar. We don't just survive. We fight back." Silara felt the fire of determination burning within her chest. For the first time since the destruction of her people, she felt like there was a future she could help build. And with Elias beside her, she knew she wouldn't have to face it alone. The days following Silara's recovery were busy and tense. Commander Elias Carter's ship, the Iron Will, traveled through the vast reaches of space with one clear purpose: to keep Silara safe. But it wasn't just the Zelfar they had to worry about. The entire galaxy had been shaken by the news of the Tavarian destruction, and a bounty was placed on Silara's head. Many believed her to be the last hope of her people, but the Zelfar weren't the only threat. Anyone who knew of her existence now wanted her dead. Silara had spent her recovery time in the medbay, getting stronger. Elias had insisted she rest, but she couldn't shake the feeling of urgency. The longer she stayed still, the more vulnerable she felt. She had to prepare herself for what was coming. She couldn't just be a passenger anymore. She had to be ready to fight. One evening, as the ship cruised through the dark expanse of space, Elias entered the medbay to check on her. "How are you feeling today?" he asked, his tone warm but serious. Silara was sitting up, her dark eyes staring out the small window at the stars. "I feel better, but not strong enough," she replied, her voice steady but filled with a quiet resolve. Elias nodded. He had seen the change in her since that first day he rescued her. She wasn't the same frightened girl who had been too weak to stand. Now she was determined. He could see it in the way she held herself. She wasn't giving up. "We're headed to a neutral zone called Haven 7, he said, sitting beside her. "It's a safe haven for anyone trying to avoid the Zelfar. A place where we can gather information and maybe make a plan." Silara looked at him, her eyes thoughtful. "You really think there's a chance we can survive this?" Elias met her gaze with confidence. "We don't survive by hiding. We survive by fighting back." Silara nodded, though doubt still lingered in her heart. She had seen the Zelfar's power firsthand. How could anyone stand against such an empire? But Elias's words stayed with her. Fight back. It had been a long time since she had thought about fighting for something. Before the attack, her people had always focused on their own way of life, their culture, their peace. But now she had no choice but to fight. It wasn't just for her survival, it was for the memory of those she had lost. As they neared Haven 7, a dark shadow hung over them. The Zelfar had already been searching for Silara. It was only a matter of time before they found her. And with a bounty on her head, they weren't going to stop until they had her. "Prepare for trouble," Elias said as he looked out the cockpit window. His voice was calm, but his eyes were sharp. "We'll be entering Haven 7 soon. Stay on alert." Silara's heart raced. She could feel the weight of their situation. They were running out of time. But just as Elias had said, they weren't running. They were going to fight. Minutes later, their ship entered the atmosphere of Haven 7, a planet known for its neutral status in the galaxy. The station that orbited the planet had always been a place for traders, explorers, and fugitives to find safe refuge. But as Elias landed the ship in the docking bay, they both knew this was no ordinary visit. It was the calm before the storm. As the hatch opened, Elias stood in front of Silara, offering her a hand to help her out. She took it without hesitation. Together, They stepped off the ship and into the station, where the hum of activity filled the air. People from all walks of life moved about, trading goods, exchanging information, and talking in hushed voices about the growing threat of the Zelfar. But Elias and Silara had no time for small talk. They needed answers. "We need information on any movements from the Zelfar fleet," Elias said to a familiar contact, Captain Riker, who had arranged the landing at Haven 7. Riker was a reliable ally, a no-nonsense man with a reputation for knowing things others didn't. Riker nodded. "I've heard whispers. The Zelfar have been hunting anyone with connections to the Tuvarians, and Silara's name is on their list." Silara's stomach sank. The Zelfar were ruthless, and if they were already closing in, there was no time to waste. "You're not alone in this," Riker added. "There are others who don't want to see the Zelfar succeed. We can't let them win." Elias turned to Silara, his eyes serious. "We'll need to gather our forces. Haven 7 is a good starting point. We'll find allies, make a plan, and then we strike." Silara swallowed hard. She had always been taught to rely on herself. But now, as Elias stood beside her, she realized that sometimes even the strongest warriors need others to stand with them. They didn't have much time. The Zelfar were coming, and they had to be ready. Together, they would make their stand. Haven 7, though once a place of refuge, had become a bustling hive of tension. Traders and travelers still passed through, but the air was thick with whispers of the Zelfar dominion, the ruthless empire that would stop at nothing to crush all who stood in its way. Elias and Silara had spent the past few days meeting with potential allies, gathering information, and preparing for what would come next. But as the days went on, it became clear that their time was running out. The Zelfar were already on the move. In the heart of the station, Elias stood before a large circular table. Around it sat several leaders from different factions, all of whom had come to offer their support. Some were old war veterans, others were smugglers or bounty hunters, and there was even a group of former soldiers from the Galactic Resistance. Humans, aliens, and everything in between. They all had one thing in common. They hated the Zelfar. Silara sat beside Elias, her eyes scanning the room. She was still learning to trust these people, still trying to understand that they were here for more than just themselves. But as she watched them talk, she began to realize that they were different. They were all united in their hatred of the Zelfar. For the first time in a long while, she felt something stirring within her, a sense of belonging. "We've all heard the rumors," said Captain Riker, standing at the front of the table. "The Zelfar are making their way through the outer rim. They're looking for anyone who may have been in contact with the Tuvarians, and now they know Silara is alive." He turned to Silara, who was sitting quietly. "The good news is that they don't yet know where she is. The bad news is that they'll be on their way soon. We need to act fast." Elias stood, his voice strong and clear. "We don't have to wait for them to come to us. We can strike first." The room fell silent as everyone turned their attention to Elias. Strike first. That was the plan they had all been waiting for, but now that it was out in the open, it felt real, too real. Silara felt a knot tighten in her stomach. "What are you suggesting, Elias?" asked a grizzled old veteran, his voice rough but steady. "We don't have the numbers. The Zelfar fleet is too powerful. If we go in without enough strength, we'll be wiped out." Elias didn't back down. "We don't need to take on the entire fleet. We need to hit them where it hurts. They'll expect us to run. Let's show them that we're not afraid to fight back. We can hit their supply lines, disrupt their communications, and keep them off balance long enough to give Silara the time she needs." Silara's heart raced. Time. That was what she needed. But time for what? She wasn't a soldier. She wasn't even sure she could still fight. The memories of her people, of the destruction they had suffered at the hands of the Zelfar, were still fresh in her mind. How could she be the one to turn the tide? How could she face the empire that had destroyed everything? Elias caught her gaze from across the table, and for a brief moment, she saw the confidence in his eyes. He believed in her. For reasons she still didn't fully understand, he believed that she had something to offer, something that could make a difference. We'll be coordinating with the Galactic Resistance to hit the Zelthar's communication stations on 3 of their outer colonies. Captain Riker added, breaking the silence. It won't be a large-scale attack, but it'll slow them down long enough for us to gather more intel and figure out their next move. I'll lead one of the teams, Elias said, his tone firm. We'll go in fast, hit them hard, and then get out. We can't afford to stay too long. The more we disrupt, the better our chances of staying hidden. Celara stood up, her voice shaky but determined. I'm coming with you. The room went quiet. Several heads turned, their eyes wide with surprise. The young alien girl, the last of the Tavarian people, was ready to join the fight. Elias raised an eyebrow. Celara, you don't have to. I have to, she interrupted. I can't just sit here while you all fight. This is my battle too. Captain Riker exchanged a glance with Elias, then nodded. If she's willing to fight, then we'll take her. We need all the help we can get. Celara felt a rush of determination fill her chest. She wasn't going to sit back and let others do the work for her. Her people were gone, and the Zelthar needed to know that there would be consequences for their actions. Elias gave a small, approving nod. All right, we'll move out at dawn. Be ready. As Celara walked out of the room with Elias, she felt a sense of purpose that had been absent for so long. The weight of her people's destruction still weighed heavily on her, but for the first time, she felt like she was doing something about it. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were fighting back. And Celara was ready to fight. The morning after their meeting was tense. The crew of the Iron Will was ready to move, but Celara could feel the weight of what was coming. The plan was simple. Strike at the heart of the Zelthar's outer colonies, disrupting their communications and supply chains. But Celara knew that once they began, there would be no turning back. She stood on the bridge of the ship, looking out at the endless expanse of space. Elias walked up beside her, his usual calm expression now showing signs of concern. The crew was ready, but the Zelthar were formidable. This mission was dangerous, and there were no guarantees they would succeed. You okay? Elias asked, his voice low but reassuring. Celara turned to him, meeting his gaze. I don't know if I'm ready for this. I've never fought like this before. My people, they didn't fight the way others do. We were peaceful. Elias nodded, understanding her fear. I get it, but you're stronger than you think. You've already survived things most of us can't even imagine. You're not alone in this. We've got each other. Celara took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his words settle in her chest. She wasn't alone anymore. She had a team, a group of people who had accepted her, who believed in her. And for the first time since the fall of her home, she wasn't just trying to survive. She was ready to fight. Elias turned to the crew, giving a sharp nod. All right, everyone, get ready. We move out in 5. The crew sprang into action. Celara watched as each person took their position, preparing the ship for their mission. There was no room for mistakes. They had to be quick, precise, and most importantly, they had to remain undetected. As the Iron Will glided through the galaxy, the tension in the air grew thicker. Celara could feel her heart pounding in her chest. They were headed straight for one of the Zelthar's key communication hubs on a small, isolated planet called Zereth 9. If they could disable the hub, it would delay the Zelthar's ability to communicate with their fleet, buying them precious time. The plan was to approach the planet under the cover of darkness, drop off the infiltration team, and then leave as quickly as possible. It wasn't a large force, just a handful of soldiers, including Elias and Celara. But it was enough. As they entered the atmosphere of Zereth 9, Celara's nerves only grew stronger. She had never seen a battle up close. And now, here she was, about to take part in one. This is it. Elias said, his voice steady, but his eyes sharp. "Remember, we're here to disable their equipment, not to fight them head-on. Stay sharp." The ship descended through the clouds, the surface of the planet slowly coming into view. The landscape was barren, with little more than rocky terrain and scattered ruins. It looked almost like a forgotten place, until you looked closer and saw the sprawling Zelthar base hidden beneath the surface. Lara couldn't help but feel a sense of unease as they landed near the base. The planet's harsh winds howled around them, the only sounds breaking the silence. The landing ramp lowered, and Elias motioned for the team to move. They moved quickly, staying low and quiet, their steps careful on the rocky ground. Silara's senses were heightened. Every sound felt amplified. Every shadow felt like a potential threat. She had to remind herself that she wasn't alone. They approached the Zelthar base under the cover of night, their movements swift and practiced. The base itself was heavily guarded, but there were weak points in its defenses. Elias had planned their entry carefully, finding a gap in the security system they could exploit. Lara kept close to Elias as they moved toward the communication tower. The tension in the air was thick, but she had never felt more alive. This wasn't just a mission to survive. It was a chance to make a difference. They reached the tower without incident, and Elias signaled for them to start planting explosives on the key communication equipment. The team worked quickly, their hands steady as they prepared the charges. Silara's heart was pounding in her chest, but her mind was clear. This was her chance to fight back, to show the Zelthar that they couldn't destroy everything. Just as the final charge was set, a sudden loud alarm blared from the base. Silara's heart skipped a beat. They had been discovered. "We need to move, now," Elias ordered. The team rushed to the exit, but the sound of footsteps grew louder. Zelthar soldiers were closing in. Lara felt her stomach twist with fear, but Elias was already moving, his gun drawn and ready. "Go, go, go," he shouted. They ran, dodging blasts from the Zelthar soldiers who were now chasing them. Lara could hear her heart pounding in her ears as they sprinted back toward the ship. The ground beneath their feet seemed to shake with every step, and the air was filled with the sound of gunfire. Just as they reached the ship, a blast rocked the ground, sending Lara tumbling forward. She felt the sting of the explosion, but Elias was there, pulling her up. "We're almost there," he yelled. With a final burst of speed, they reached the ship, and the ramp began to close behind them. The iron will shot into the air, leaving the chaos of Zereth 9 behind. As they flew into the safety of space, Lara took a moment to catch her breath. They had done it. The mission had been a success, but she knew this was only the beginning. The Zelthar would come after them with everything they had. But Lara wasn't afraid. For the first time, she felt ready for whatever came next. After their narrow escape from Zereth 9, the crew of the Iron will found themselves back in the deep void of space, surrounded by stars that seemed distant and cold. The mission had been a success, but the victory felt hollow. They had hit the Zelthar hard, disabling their communication tower, but they knew it was only a matter of time before the Empire would retaliate. Lara stood on the bridge, her eyes fixed on the vastness ahead. She had felt the thrill of battle, the rush of danger, but now, the reality of their situation was sinking in. The Zelthar would come for them, and when they did, it wouldn't be a simple raid. It would be an all-out war. Elias joined her, his hands clasped behind his back. "How are you holding up?" he asked quietly, his voice steady but filled with concern. Lara turned to face him, her expression serious. "It's not over, is it?" Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, a recognition that this fight was far from finished. Elias shook his head. "No, it's not. But you did well back there. You showed them what you're capable of." His eyes met hers with a look of quiet pride. Lara wasn't sure she could believe it. She had felt the fear during the mission, the uncertainty of whether they would make it out alive. But she had followed through, and now she had to push forward. "We have to keep moving," Elias continued. "We've bought ourselves a little time, but that's all. The Zelfar will regroup, and we need to strike again, harder this time." Silara nodded, but in her heart, she felt a growing weight. Every action they took, every move they made, was pulling them deeper into the war. The Zelfar Dominion was an empire unlike any other. They wouldn't stop until they had crushed all resistance. Back in the command room, the rest of the crew was busy preparing for the next step. Captain Riker was already working on the ship's navigation system, planning their next destination. "We've gathered enough intel from the communication hub. The Zelfar are using a nearby system for their next major operation, and if we hit them there, we can disrupt their entire fleet." Silara listened carefully. This could be the key to turning the tide of the war. If they could knock out the Zelfar's supply lines and command structure, they might stand a chance at slowing them down. But it wouldn't be easy. The Zelfar were everywhere, and their forces were vast. "When do we leave?" Elias asked, already moving to the controls. Riker glanced at his screen. "We can't wait too long. The Zelfar will be looking for us now. I suggest we move within the next few hours." The urgency in his voice only added to Silura's growing sense of responsibility. She had to act. Her people's fate was tied to this fight. Her survival was no longer just about keeping herself safe. It was about doing everything she could to stop the Zelfar from destroying everything else. "We're ready to move," Elias said, his voice strong and clear. As the iron will powered up and began to shift into the next phase of their journey, Silara found herself once again staring out at the endless sea of stars. Each one felt like a world, an untold story, a life that could be lost if they failed. But failure wasn't an option. Hours later, they arrived at their destination, a massive Zelfar fleet station nestled near a small moon, surrounded by asteroid fields and dense debris. It was the perfect hiding place for a fleet, and the perfect place for their next mission. "This is it," Elias said, his voice cold with determination. "We'll hit them hard and fast. Disrupt their supply routes. It's our best chance." Silara stood beside him, feeling a sudden rush of adrenaline. This was what they had been working toward, but there was something in the air now, a tension that was almost palpable. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for something much larger. The team was small but skilled. It wasn't a full-scale invasion, but their goal was clear: disable the Zelfar fleet's ability to move. If they could do that, they would force the Empire to divert more of their forces to these outer colonies, giving the Galactic Resistance and other rebel factions a chance to regroup. Silara was once again part of the team that would infiltrate the station. As the Iron Will approached the fleet station, the crew could see the intricate web of defense systems surrounding it. It was heavily guarded, but there were gaps, places where they could slip through unnoticed. "We'll enter under the cover of the asteroid field," Elias explained as the crew got into position. "Once we're inside, we disable the supply systems and then extract as quickly as possible. No heroics. We need to stay quiet." Silara nodded, gripping the weapon at her side. She wasn't sure how she felt about the violence they were about to cause, but she knew it was necessary. They were fighting a force that had wiped out entire civilizations, a force that didn't care about life. As they made their way through the shadows of the asteroid field, Silara felt her heart rate quicken. The station was just ahead, its towering structures coming into view. The battle was about to begin. The crew's preparations were meticulous, and the plan was clear: get in, destroy what they could, and get out. But as the ship drew closer to the station, Silara couldn't shake the feeling that this mission would be different. They weren't just making a strike. They were sending a message. The Zelfar were powerful, but they were about to learn that humanity's resolve was stronger. The tension in the air was thick as the crew of the Iron Will prepared for the most dangerous mission yet. The Zelfar fleet station loomed ahead, its massive, dark silhouette blocking out the stars behind it. It was heavily guarded, but Silara could feel the determination in her bones. This was it, the mission that could shift the balance of the war. "We're almost there," Elias said, his voice calm but serious. He stood at the helm, his eyes focused on the fleet station ahead. "Once we're in range, we'll begin the assault. Remember the plan. Disable the supply systems, take out their power grid, and then extract. Fast and clean." Silara nodded. Her heart was pounding, but she knew that hesitation would get them nowhere. The Zelfar were ruthless. If they didn't act now, the opportunity would be lost. The fate of countless lives rested on their success. As the Iron Will neared the fleet station, the crew moved into position. Their small but skilled team was ready. This wasn't just about fighting. It was about survival, freedom, and stopping the Zelfar Dominion from crushing anyone who dared to oppose them. Entering the asteroid field now, Captain Riker reported from the navigation console. The ship moved carefully, slipping between massive floating rocks that would obscure their approach. It wasn't easy to navigate, but it was the best cover they had. Silara couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. The mission was dangerous, but she had trained for this. She had learned to push aside the fear. There was no room for doubt now. "This is it. Let's move, people," Elias said, the urgency in his voice now matching the tension in the air. The ship dropped below the radar of the Zelfar station, its systems momentarily shielded by the asteroid debris. They landed in a small, hidden hangar on the station, a place overlooked by the station's primary defenses. The team moved quickly, gathering their gear and preparing for the next phase of the mission. Silara's breath came in shallow gasps as they moved toward the station's central control room. She knew what they had to do, but she couldn't ignore the feeling in her chest, the feeling that this was more than just another mission. Elias led the team forward, his expression focused. They moved swiftly and silently, their boots barely making the sound on the cold metal floors of the station. The control room was up ahead. All they had to do was disable the main power grid, and the entire fleet station would be thrown into chaos. Without power, the Zelfar wouldn't be able to coordinate their attacks, and their supply lines would be cut off. But as they neared the control room, alarms suddenly blared. The Zelfar knew they were there. It was too late to turn back now. "They know we're here," Riker said, his voice grim. "We need to finish this quickly." Silara's heart pounded in her chest. There was no going back now. They had to get to the power grid, or everything would fall apart. They ran, their footsteps echoing down the hall as they neared their target. As they reached the control room, they were met with a line of Zelfar soldiers. They were heavily armed and prepared for a fight. But the crew of the Iron Will was faster. Elias raised his weapon, firing a precise shot that took out the first soldier. The rest of the team followed, moving as one, clearing the room. "Plant the charges," Elias shouted. "We don't have much time." Silara ran to the control panel, working quickly to plant the explosives that would cripple the power grid. The countdown began. Each second felt like an eternity. They had to get out before the Zelfar reinforcements arrived. As she finished planting the final charge, a loud explosion rocked the station. The lights flickered, and the control systems went down. The power grid had been destroyed. The Zelfar would be scrambling to repair it, but they wouldn't be able to respond quickly enough. "We've done it. Let's move," Elias shouted, already heading for the exit. The team ran back toward the hangar, their footsteps quick and urgent. They could hear the sounds of Zelfar soldiers closing in, but they didn't slow down. They had a window of opportunity, and they had to make it count. As they reached the hangar, a final explosion shook the station. The Iron Will was waiting for them, its engines roaring to life. The crew rushed on board, and the ship lifted off, leaving the chaos of the Zelfar fleet station behind. But just as they thought they were safe, a fleet of Zelfar ships appeared on the horizon, their weapons charged and ready to fire. "We're not out of this yet," Captain Riker said, his voice steady but tense. "Hold on," Elias said, gripping the controls. "We're not running anymore. We're fighting back." The iron will shot forward, its engines firing at full power. The Zelfar ships closed in, but the crew wasn't about to back down. Scilara stood at the helm, her eyes focused on the enemy ahead. For the first time, she felt a sense of control. They weren't just reacting to the Zelfar. They were fighting back with everything they had. The iron will was a symbol of resistance, and as long as they had the strength to fight, they would keep pushing forward. The battle was far from over. But Scilara knew one thing. As long as they fought, they would never give up.